That grassing on your mates or moving away?
Oh, no, that's all over and done with. I'm staying.
Well, what is this big problem?
It's about the lettering. What do you think? Do you think I should have it done in gold leaf?
What surprises lie in store for the intrepid Annika this Saturday night?
Hello there, well, we're just about to be set another challenge. We're in Scotland this time. We've been told to drive over the Forth Bridge and all will be revealed. Don't forget to join us to find out what's happened.
Challenge Annika this Saturday, 7:25 on 1.
If preparing a Christmas dinner seems an impossible challenge, then on BBC Two in a minute, Delia Smith presents her brand new guide to the best of the season's traditional recipes. Here on BBC One, we take the wrappers off some new ideas, heading for tomorrow's world.
Welcome to another live edition of Tomorrow's World. In a moment, a look at why, in this disposable age, this bit of plastic is hard to throw away. Also in the show tonight, why saving wild animals for the future means putting them in the freezer now. How a radio astronomer's turned his attention from the stars to the streets of Cambridge. And how a Korean delicacy made of ground acorns could become the recipe for cleaning up Europe's dirty water. But first, the shape of things to come and come back. Kate.
The flying ring looks very simple, but thanks to an aeronautical engineer's design, it is a world record holder. It's been thrown further than anything else in history, over 350 metres across Niagara Falls. But that does mean a lot of fetching if you're throwing on your own. So, from a circle to a triangle, a plastic boomerang. Adding the extra side keeps it rigid, although it's still lightweight. And when you throw it so that it spins at an angle, the wings at the corners produce more lift at the top than the bottom, which turns it around. So it comes back to the thrower. In theory. Well, there's obviously not enough room to demonstrate my technique here in the studio, but I did go out earlier for some triangle training.
Yes! Yes!
In this flask of liquid nitrogen, there's the frozen embryo of a marmoset monkey. It's not exactly alive, nor is it quite dead. It's being kept in a state of suspended animation. In this tiny tube, the marmoset can live in a form which doesn't need food, water or space. It's the bare minimum, genetic existence. But by the year 2020, it could ensure the survival of the marmoset and all the world's wild animals. "50 years ago, the need to save the world's animals from extinction was treated as science fiction. Today, it's a fact. By the year 2020, the number of people on Earth could double, and zoologists are warning that this population explosion could destroy the habitat of many of our wild animals.
Unfortunately, the areas where human populations are growing so rapidly are also areas of high species diversity. And when we look at the animals that we think will be threatened by human population growth, we see that we're talking about a large proportion of all animals and some of the ones that are most familiar to us.
Familiar faces, seen more often than not in the zoo. It can seem exploitative, animals taken out of their natural environment for our entertainment. But as the wilderness disappears, the only way these animals will survive is if their populations are managed. They will have to live on reserves or zoos, in what's called the zoo ark.
Long time ago.
But how are we going to keep them all? On current calculations, 800 mammals, 800 bird species and 400 different reptiles and amphibians will need help. Conservationists are having to plan 200 years ahead, but over that time the small populations in zoos and reserves would become hopelessly inbred. To have enough different genes to survive in the zoo ark, it's estimated that most species need a minimum population of 500 animals.
There simply isn't space in all the zoos and all the reserves for that number of animals. In fact, we estimate there's probably space for about a half of the mammals that need it. So we have to think of other solutions to that problem. And one solution is to use cryopreservation, the so-called frozen zoo, being able to store away genetic material in liquid nitrogen.
It's been possible to freeze sperm for the past 40 years and embryos for the past 5. It's routine in farm animals, but these techniques have only recently been applied to rare wild animals. Advances in reproductive technology mean that now even the elephant can reproduce in a test tube. And instruments like this cryomicroscope mean that the results could be kept in the freezer. It allows scientists to watch the freezing process and work out exactly how it affects each species. Under here is a mouse's egg being slowly frozen by the supply of liquid nitrogen. And over here on the monitor, you can see what happens. As the ice moves across, it's important that the crystals don't harm the egg here. The constant grey is a good sign. Black would indicate damage.
Here at London Zoo, they're already freezing eggs, sperm and embryos from endangered species like the Siberian tiger or the gorilla, and developing the technology to check that they're still normal after defrosting. They can monitor the fertility of thawed sperm by watching how they swim. Scientists hope that cryopreservation will be used to build up a bank of genetic material from all the endangered species, and even a bank of embryos. Using test tube fertilization, they can create animals with exactly the right genetic mix to ensure that the species keeps its diversity. Once the embryo has grown to the 4-cell stage, embryo manipulators allow just one cell to be removed. From this single cell, they can discover the animal's sex and some of the genetic characteristics it's inherited. The rest of the embryo is undamaged and can be consigned to liquid nitrogen for posterity.
We're now in the position where we need to start applying these technologies to species problems. And we need to start applying them fairly soon, because many of the species we're worried about are now rapidly declining in numbers in the wild. At the moment, many of these species still number in the thousands, and that's a good basis from which to preserve them. If we leave it much longer and their numbers have declined to fewer than that, it may well be too late.
This week, a new range of ready-cooked meals has been launched, and they represent something of a culinary revolution. They've been pre-cooked by sending an electric current directly through the food. The process, called ohmic heating, exploits the same basic principle as this light bulb. If you pass a current through any material that resists its flow, then it generates heat. That's why the filament glows red. Food can work just like the filament. It also resists a flow of current through it, generates its own heat, and essentially cooks itself. Now, at the moment over here, we have some milk in a beaker with a couple of electrodes, and the temperature of that milk is 24 Celsius. But when the power is switched on and the current flows between those electrodes through the milk, you can see that the temperature rises very rapidly. And the process works just as well with small chunks of solid foods in anything from casseroles to curries. Cooking food to preserve it relies on heating it thoroughly to make sure that you've killed any harmful bacteria like salmonella, which would otherwise multiply during storage. But normally, heating foods right through to sterilizing temperatures takes up to 2 hours. And while the inside gets cooked, the outside often gets overcooked. Ohmic heating avoids this because, in practice, most foods will generate heat evenly within themselves, as you can see now with this milk here. However, the problem with this method has been that the high currents needed rapidly corroded some of the electrodes. But they got around that particular problem by using titanium electrodes protected by a special coating. On the equipment itself, the electrodes are mounted here and here, and the food is pumped up the central pipe in the middle there, cooking as it goes. Using the system on a commercial scale, all bacteria are killed within 75 seconds. And it can serve up to 3 tons of cooked food in an hour. At the end of the process, the meals are sealed in sterile packs, which means they should keep safely at room temperature for up to a year. At the moment, this range is only sold to caterers, but we'll all have a chance to try meals like these when they hit the supermarkets sometime next year. In the meantime, here's Howard, who's been looking at an even more exotic menu.
For centuries, Koreans have prepared traditional dishes made from ground-up acorns. It's believed they help to purify the blood, and the favourite delicacy here in Daejeon is acorn jelly. But the humble acorn could also turn out to be a remedy for a quite different and very contemporary problem: heavy metal pollution. Toxic metals like lead, mercury and cadmium from Korea's booming industries are widely discharged into rivers and streams. With the country's growing environmental awareness, though, the search is now on to find new green ways of tackling the problem. Enter the acorn and an unexpected fusion of old and new Korea. Investigating American findings that tannic acid can chemically bind with some heavy metals, Dr. Chang In-soon of the newly opened Atomic Energy Research Institute in Daejeon began looking for a cheap, natural source of the acid in Korea. Buying his weekly supply of acorn jelly at the Kapsa Temple one afternoon, he was reminded that acorns are extremely rich in tannic acid. Together with colleagues from the Institute, Dr. Chang collected the samples for his experiments in the ancient oak forests around the temple. Back in the laboratory, the acorns are shelled and left to soak in distilled water. After a couple of days, they release a dark juice, which the team has discovered contains not just tannic acid, but a previously unknown compound they've called acornic acid. This is a mixed solution of heavy metals that contains things like lead, mercury and copper. Now watch what happens when I put in a pipette of the acornic acid. The acid is gradually removing the metals from the solution, letting them sink to the bottom. Once they've settled out completely, the residue can be easily drawn off with filters. The team reckon they can reduce uranium concentration in water to just 0.1 parts per million. Conventional chemical treatments usually reduce it to around 5 parts per million. But where do they go from here?
We are very much concerned about pollution, especially water pollution. We're anxious to commercialize this process quickly to make our water safer and better. We are still experimenting, but I am sure it will cope with real industrial pollution.
They're planning to open a pilot plant here soon, and in Europe, where researchers are also looking for biological alternatives to existing chemical treatments, there's been considerable interest in Korea's acorn option. Dr. Chang and his team reckon that 1 kilogram of acorns could treat just under 3.5 tons of heavy metal waste. But if the process really took off, what impact would it have on the oak forests? Millions of tons of waste are produced around the world each year, and they need an awful lot of acorns. So the next step will be to synthesize the acornic acid. At the moment, its chemical structure is still a mystery. But if they can crack that, it should be possible to mass produce the acid. And once they've got that information, the humble acorn can be returned to the forest to continue its original purpose.
This week, hopes for a universal vaccine for AIDS have been dashed by 2 papers published in Nature magazine. But the same work does promise that another approach to vaccination should succeed. Because of the way it infects its victims, using the whole killed AIDS virus as the basis for a vaccine, as in other common vaccines, doesn't work. So scientists have been trying instead to use just a tiny protein fragment from the virus to trigger the body's immune response. The new research, carried out in the United States and Germany, at last confirms that this approach is valid. Although working with a different virus, they found that such a tiny protein fragment can indeed spur the immune system into action. But it seems that the exact fragment which acts as the vital trigger varies from person to person, which means that any future vaccine would have to be tailor-made to suit the genetic makeup of the individual receiving it. And in areas where the number of people that need protection is high, that could be a very expensive business.
The Department of the Environment gave permission this week for a trial aimed at introducing a foreign insect into Britain in the hope of bringing the ever-increasing spread of bracken under control. Modern farming practices have led to a proliferation of bracken across the British countryside. It takes over 20 square miles every year and causes farmers annual losses of about £10 million. Bracken is poisonous to livestock and to most insects, which means there's little to keep it under natural control. But these South African caterpillars should do the job. In the trial, they'll be kept outdoors in cages for 2 years, so the scientists can make sure they haven't imported any new insect diseases. Lab tests show the bugs would die rather than eat anything but bracken, so they shouldn't threaten any other plants or creatures. If this proves to be true, the bracken-munching caterpillars may soon be worming their way into the British countryside.
What lies in the centre of our galaxy? Ever since the 1940s, when a mysterious source of radio waves was found there, astronomers have been hazarding guesses, including the possibility that it's a black hole.
But while they could hear it, they couldn't see it, because whatever is there is hidden by clouds of interstellar dust. Now, using one of the world's most powerful telescopes, a group of German astronomers have made the first pictures of the center of our galaxy. When they first got their pictures, the galactic center was obscured by a bright star which lay exactly in their line of sight. But with image processing, they removed the light of the star to reveal two other sources of light hidden behind. And the smaller one seems to sit at the very heart of our galaxy. But that's not the end of the mystery, because while one of the astronomers thinks they've discovered a very hot star, the other says it could, after all, be a jet of light from material spiraling into a black hole. Unfortunately, the puzzle is destined to remain unsolved, at least until next March, because until then, the Earth is on the wrong side of the Sun and no more observations can be made.
This week, the largest robot in the world was put through its paces in Brussels. The robot is the product of a European Community-sponsored information technology project that has brought together a German research group and commercial companies from 5 European countries. The 25-metre-long arm has 8 joints, all of which move in 3 dimensions, and they can be pre-programmed to move with an accuracy of 10 millimetres. The robot will ultimately be used for heavy lifting work, for spreading concrete, and for cleaning and painting big ships and aircraft. The next stage of the project includes the development of touch-sensitive tools, so that, for instance, the huge brushes can follow the contour of a ship even more accurately. But for now, it's proving its precision by trying to get a taste of the local brew.
Left over, right. Oh dear, all this lotus position business can be pretty tricky if you're not made of rubber. But this portable chair should help me lose the backache and find my inner self by supporting the base of my spine. The idea came to its inventor while he was meditating. So now I'm sitting comfortably. I think I'll stay here for a while to see if I feel similarly inspired. Judith.
Despite a move towards organic farming, chemical weed killers are still the choice of most farmers, though working with them does mean full protective gear, visors, suits and gloves. But a less obvious problem is that these herbicides are often flammable. Let's just light this again. And try again. They are very flammable, and after a while they go up in flames, and when they burn, they give off highly poisonous fumes. But a new range of herbicides has been developed that's just as effective, but is far less poisonous, and these don't burn at all. The need was most graphically illustrated 3 years ago when those flammable herbicides fueled a fire at a chemical plant in Switzerland, causing massive environmental damage to the River Rhine. It's not the herbicide itself that burns, but it's the liquid solvents that they have to be dissolved in so that they can be sprayed. So British chemists started hunting for a safe alternative, and they came up with water. But the herbicides have been specially formulated not to dissolve in water, so rain can't wash them from the land to pollute water supplies. So the chemists tried grinding down herbicide chemicals into a very fine powder, which could then be suspended in the water and sprayed on the fields. And that didn't work. What happened was that these filters in the sprayers, which should look like this, became clogged, because in water the herbicide had grown into needle-like orange crystals. You can see them magnified on this monitor. But the very same crystals turned out to be the answer, because these are totally stable. Grind them up, suspend them in water, and they don't regrow, and they don't block the sprayer. So was the problem solved? Well, almost. Stable crystals had been found, but unfortunately growing them in water takes a whole year. The chemists had to speed things up. And this demonstrates the principle. They've used a solution of a chemical made up to a specific concentration and temperature. Now, if I add a few of the crystals I want, very quickly more of exactly the same type of crystals grow around it. You can see them, many of them developing there. Using a modification of this technique means the stable crystals can be produced on an industrial scale in a matter of minutes. Ground down and suspended in water, the new herbicides are safer, both for the environment and for the people who make and use them. Now here's Howard on location.
And the time's just coming up to the hour. In a moment, traffic news.
Hello, Pam. Have the BBC film crew arrived yet? No. All right, I'll go and meet them now.
Why does this have to happen when I'm going filming? Oh, yeah, hello. I've broken down on the A603 just outside Cambridge. That's right. Howard Stableford.
Mike.
Hello, Mike.
Because we discovered 223, 235, 255.
He's normally very prompt. I don't quite know what.
Motorways at the moment, the M11, no major problems to report.
Oh, excellent. Here he is now.
And even the Dartford Tunnel.
The trouble went dead on me for no power at all, so I don't know what
an instant sort of cut out? Or?
Yeah, it sort of went a few bumps and then came to a stop.
You've been waiting long?
Just about an hour.
Evidently, there's a new sort of system we're interested in. It's called a tracking system, where they can tell where patrols are exactly, and we could get here a lot quicker for you.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because that's exactly what I'm going to try and film.
You joke.
I'm really sorry. I've been stuck by the road for about an hour.
Let's get going now.
As a radio astronomer, how did you come to invent a navigational and tracking system?
Well, I was studying quasars at the edge of the universe using this portable radio telescope.
That's a telescope?
That's a telescope. Well, it's a load of aerials, and I planted the aerials in a farmer's field, and then I had to discover where I'd planted them. So I developed the radio navigational technique in order to measure their position. Look, I got it all set up inside.
Thanks.
Right. On the screen here, we have a map of Cambridge, and right here is the Cavendish Laboratory. This circle here shows exactly where we are, and as we drive around, the circle will move around and show us our position on the map, at every time correct to about 5 meters.
Really? Well, let's try it out. If you set off, and I'll keep an eye on the cursor, and we'll see where we go to.
Righto.
Okay, so we've come along this road, and we're approaching a T-junction, aren't we? Circle's keeping up with this pretty well. As well as the display in the van itself, the information can be relayed to a control station so that the vehicle can be tracked precisely as it's driving along. The system is so sensitive, it can display the position of the van at every stage as it goes round this roundabout. It can even show what lane it's in. So it can be used by anyone who needs to know exactly where their vehicles are all the time, from car breakdown services to high security deliveries or fire, ambulance and police fleets. But what separates this from other systems isn't just what it does, but how it does it. Most tracking systems need to use a network of specially dedicated radio transmitters. But apart from being expensive to set up, they also need their own frequencies. And as the airwaves get more and more crowded, finding space for yet more frequencies becomes increasingly difficult. But with this system, instead of needing new transmitters, it's able to use any of the radio transmissions that already exist. In fact, it uses 8 of the nearby local and national radio stations. The signals are picked up by a normal car radio in the van, and by a second receiver at a fixed location, in this case the university labs. By measuring the difference in the time taken for the same signal to reach the 2 receivers, the system can work out how far the receivers are from each transmitter. And since the position of the fixed receiver is known, the position of the van can be calculated. And because the system can use any radio transmitters, it can be set up immediately anywhere in the world that has a radio network.
I hope very much that we will interest a company or companies to take it out into the marketplace, and then I can get on with my radio astronomy.
For the last 100 years, inventors and eccentrics have been trying to improve the efficiency of the bike with some rather strange results, like this one. Designed by a heating engineer from Hong Kong, who else? It's a sort of cross between a bike and a pogo stick. Now, on a standard bike, you tend to use your leg muscles mostly for producing the power, but with this one, I can spread the load over many other muscles in my body as it bobs up and down, which means that I should be able to go further without getting so tired.
Well, instead of having the pedals diagonally opposite each other, they're both in the same position, and the chainring is connected by this rod up to the saddle. So pushing down on the pedals forces the saddle upwards, and then the weight of the rider brings the pedals back up again. It works like a mechanical piston. Right, well, I think I'll have a go now. Let's see if I can get the hang of it as well. Oop. Well, setting off is going to take a bit of getting used to, but it seems okay. But with all this bobbing up and down, I don't know how good it would be if you're the sort of person who gets seasick.
And because you only have to push down with your legs for half of each stroke, it's a lot less tiring. Well, and the inventor also claims that for heavier people, it's an advantage because they go faster. Sounds like a good excuse to go and find something to eat. That's all for tonight. Until next week, good night.
BBC Two's motoring magazine Top Gear in a minute goes for a ride on a two-wheel drive motorcycle and reports on historic rallying.
Tour the corridors of power in House of Cards.
I'm the chief whip, merely a functionary. I keep the troops in line. I put a bit of stick about. I make them jump. And I shall, of course, give my absolute loyalty to whoever emerges as my leader.
Today, Henry Collingridge emerged as the popular choice to lead his party as Prime Minister.
Well, let's see how he does.
Skullduggery and Scandal in a new series, starting Sunday at 9 on 1.
Daryl's ambitions are a bit more down to earth now. One, he's feeling homesick for Tracy and some love on the run in this week's Birds of a Feather.